Good morning, Hill Country Bible Church. My name's Tim. I get to be the pastor here. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for my podium. Appreciate that as well. I swear, like 9 hours ago, it was a nice day, and now welcome to winter. Maybe 9 hours from now, we'll be back to spring. Who knows? Hey, I got a couple things that I need to let you know before we get started today. When you leave service today, we're going to hand you something. And there's an old Mitch Hedberg joke that says, whenever people try and hand me a brochure, they're saying, here, you throw this away. And so you're going to be tempted to not even consider what it is. It looks like this, and it is a celebration of a lot of things that God has accomplished through a lot of faithful people in our church this year. And there's a balancing act, right? As a church, we want to celebrate that the things God calls us to, He's faithful to honor. And so we should stop and remember the goodness of God. There's a lot of stories in the Bible where God gave them commands to remember some goodness that He enacted. But then there's also this, this 21st century propensity to brand build. And so hopefully as a church, we can do the former and not do the latter, right? Where we can recognize there are some really sweet moments in the last year of our church where God called us, you and myself, to do some things. We took a big gulp and we told Him yes, and then He was honored in it. And that's what we hope to do in our annual report, is honor some of the things God called us to do and some of the things that happened as a result. So you're going to be tempted to be like, cool, thanks. It's another piece of noise in an otherwise busy December. If you could not pull a Mitch Hedberg, if you could not chuck this when you leave, and maybe set it in your car seat and then eventually get to it, maybe even a moment when you're a little bit discouraged that it feels like, man, God, where are you in all of this? Maybe this is one of those things that could encourage you, okay? So that's that. Now, another piece that can sometimes be discouraging that we'd like to turn into an encouragement is all of the hope and confidence I have about my faith with what God has done in my life suddenly feels very brittle when I invite someone who doesn't believe it to come believe it. And so sometimes I feel like, it's so funny, my neighbors, they know I'm a pastor, but I'm not Pastor Tim to my neighbors. Hey, Tim, I see you're cooking. What are you doing today? And so when I invite my world to Christmas and they tell me no, it can be so disheartening. And even worse, when you hop onto our website and you see that there's no seats left at the inn. And so if you hopped on to invite your world this week to come to Christmas, you saw that all of our services are full. So this week we opened up another service. And if you've been trying to balance out courage and invitation and bringing people, sometimes the encouragement of seeing more room for them at the inn is what you need. So we've got a noon service open now on the 24th, and if you guys fill that one up, we'll open up more on the 23rd, and if you fill that one up, I don't know what we'll do, because we're running out of room at the end. But thank you guys for doing that, and yeah, our team is, I know there's five, we can just get it all out of our system. There we go. Really what we hope, though, is we really don't want a full house. We want an open invitation that if someone in your world would come if there were room, that's what we want to do. So we're really not looking to stat pads. We're trying to have an open front door for your world to hear what we're proud of. So with all of that said, we want to remind you that last week we kicked off a series in the heart of what Christmas should be. Because I remember a time, and I don't know if this was in the 1900s or what, but I swear, December used to be a legitimate whole month where we could breathe a little lighter and we could drink in a little bit deeper joy. And I don't know if it's happened in the last 5 or the last 15, but it feels like Christmas just has to be crammed in with everything else we're stressed about in our lives. We don't give ourselves a month off from our frustration and stress. And that Christmas has to, just move in with all of my stressed out roommates and just live next to them. And it's robbed it of the power it's got to be a legitimate source of joy. And so the assignment that I've got for myself all month long is to remind you of the depth of the who, what, when, where, why, and how, that Christmas has legitimate power to bring legitimate joy into your life. And last week, we looked at the when of the very first Christmas. The advent and arrival of Jesus, the Bible would say, happened at the perfect time. And to corroborate that, we talked about Greek linguistics and Roman roads. And if that didn't float your boat, then we've got another exciting thing today. We've got genealogies, because this week is the who of Christmas. So if you've got a Bible, why don't you open up to Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1 pushes us into the idea that Joseph and Mary come from a long line of promises from God and a long line of problems from people. And these promises and these problems are not like on the outs of what God's plan was, but they're essential to what God wanted to accomplish. So as we take a look at the God who came near, we're going to take a look at who was part of the first Christmas story. And in Matthew, it opens with this, chapter 1, verse 1. It says, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Whoa, that's like really fast jumps. Because Jesus came from David, came from Abraham. There's a little bit more to that story than that. Matthew gets into that. He said, Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. All right, let's stop there for just a minute. Matthew does a couple things. He says, Jesus came from David, who came from Abraham. All right, hold on. I'm too excited. There's a lot more to the story than that. And in verse 2, he says, let's start with Abraham. Now, anytime you read Abraham in the Bible, most times if you're a Bible person or if you're a person of Jewish faith, you know that Abraham is really the father of faith. The book of Romans talks about that. The Jewish scriptures talk about that. Abraham is also the father of the Jewish nation because of something that happened in his life. Abraham is one of a few people, David is another, where God made a covenant with them. God made a covenant with Adam. He made a covenant with Noah. He made a covenant with Abraham, Moses, and David. And so if you go off to Bible college, we call those the Adamic or the Noahic or the Abrahamic covenants. And when a Jewish person would be reading the lineage of Jesus, the genealogy, and it starts off with Abraham, they would know that you're not starting necessarily in a certain point in time, but a certain promise from God. Because when God spoke to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12 and in 15, he gave Abraham 3 promises, okay? He promised Abraham a land, a nation all his own, and here's what's really interesting to me. That nation is still in headlines every 7 days in the country you live in. As a matter of fact, really recently, there was a conservative YouTuber podcaster who interviewed a Texan senator, and they actually, quite literally, had an abbreviated conversation about the Abrahamic covenant and the promise that God would give Abraham a land all his own. Now, I don't necessarily want to stop and deviate and talk about this. I just think it's fascinating that people don't trust the reliability of the Bible, but the things that the Bible talks about still lay the foundation for what we are obsessed with today. I think there's something to that. But the first part of the Abrahamic covenant is a land. The second part of the Abrahamic covenant is a people. God promised he would make Abraham the father of many, the father of a nation. Well, now that's ironic because Abraham was too old to even have a single kid. And as a matter of fact, at the end of his life, Abraham had one single son of promise. Now there's another son, and that's a whole telenovela story that is hilarious if you read it. But at the end of Abraham's life, God gave him one son. Okay, that's actually why when you read Abraham, it says like, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because the time you make it to Jacob, Jacob had 12 sons, and that was enough for Jewish people to remember God's promise of nations to Abraham, we can see the whisper of in the 12 sons of Jacob. So often when the Jewish people were reverent to the promise that God gave Abraham, they would say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because in Jacob, in that generation, I can see the nation. They're not there yet. They're just 12 kids. They're 12 boys, and they're boys because they like rough and tumble. But in those 12, I see the promise, not just of land, but of nation. But if you're a Bible scholar and you go off to Bible college and you learn about the Abrahamic covenant, it's land and it's seed and it's blessing. God also told Abraham, through you, all nations will be blessed. So when Matthew writes down that Jesus is the son of Abraham, the son of David, he's saying, well, the land part of the promise has been filled. The people part of the promise has been filled. And for centuries, people have guessed about what the blessing meant. Matthew is being very clear. Jesus is the blessing that God promised Abraham for all nations. So if you were a Jewish person and you were only obsessed with just yourself, your nation, your land, your boundaries, he was reminding you that Jesus, yes, a promise of this Jewish faith that came through this Jewish lineage, don't forget, in the beginning, God promised a blessing to all nations. So that's the promise to Abraham. Well, it goes on. And if you read a couple, he's like being diligent and working his way through generations. And when he gets to verse 6, he says, now back to his original point, Jesse was the father of David the king. Well, I told you guys that Adam and Noah and Abraham and Moses and David were given covenants. Here's the covenant given to David. David started off as a shepherd. I mean, that is a blue collar, that is a no collar profession. And so David went from a very humble beginning. God spoke to his life and said, David, you take care of things. If my people want a king, that's the character of a king I want. Not someone who's power hungry because I'm powerful. Not someone who thinks they're wise because I'm wisdom. But David, you take care of things. So if I were to choose a king, that's the temperament I would choose. And David's blown away. Because he gets on a work truck every morning at 6 a.m. to go like landscape or do construction. Like he's like a humble dude. And God says, I want you to be a king. And so later, years in his life later, David is the king. And if you read the Bible, he's got this thing in his heart. And he's like, God, it bothers me that I used to live in fields and now I live in a palace and you're still in a tent. Now, if you didn't grow up in church and you don't know what that means, it means that when the Jewish people, the 12 sons of Jacob, proliferated in Egypt, and then God delivered them out of captivity to freedom, he said, Moses, I want you to do something. I want you to build a tent. I'm going to tell you exactly how I want it, because everywhere you go, I want you guys to remember that I'm with you. It's called the tabernacle. It's called the tent. And that tent was still being used when David was king. And David felt terrible. He's like, God, I remember sleeping on a rock and you're in a tent and I'm in a palace. I'm going to build you a palace. I want your house to be nicer than mine. Well, God said a couple things back to him. He said, number one, David, brother, I don't live in that tent. Like the whole earth is my footstool. Like I'm higher than the heavens. So it really doesn't matter how nice a house you make me. It's still going to be janky compared to what I've got. But brother, I'm going to honor your humility. And so here's what I promise you. And this is the Davidic covenant. He said, David, someone is going to come through your line whose throne will last forever. And so when Matthew is writing these things down about Jesus, he's drawing attention back to that promise. That in the Abrahamic covenant, that the land was delivered and the people were delivered. What was the blessing? It's Jesus. And the Davidic covenant, well, when is David going to have someone sit on his throne who rules forever? Rome was in charge. They had terrible kings by the time Rome was around. Herod was one of those, right? We learned at the end of the book of Acts that these regent kings over Israel had no power, and they certainly weren't godly. But Matthew says David's promise, that's Jesus. So we've got these, and this is really important, these conditional and these unconditional covenants. Let me explain to you the difference between a conditional and an unconditional covenant. If you have ever haggled the joy of Facebook Marketplace, you know what a conditional covenant is, okay? We've got things in our garage that over the years we've learned we actually don't need. Why have we learned that? Because they've been in our garage for years. Now, I kind of have a soft rule, and it's soft, I'll explain in a minute, that if I've had something for over a year and I have not needed it, I really don't actually need it. Now, at that point, I should regularly be getting rid of things, but usually it's 3 to 5 to sometimes 7 years later where I go out to that garage and I see that thing. I'll give you an example of something in my garage right now. We have a really nice CrossFit-ready foam box jump that has not been jumped upon in many years, okay? And I keep telling myself, I need to get rid of that. Now, I've got a rule for myself as well. The value of all objects, regardless of what I paid for it in the beginning, the value is now $20 because I hate the conditional covenant nature of Facebook. Because you cannot tell someone on Facebook that, listen, I paid $14,000 for this. They're going to want to pay you $10,000, okay? And so I just start my price at $20. Whether it used to cost $700 or whether it costs $200, I don't care. That make-believe treadmill that I'm not going to get back on is now worth $20. And here's what happens every time. The rock bottom price that I've already listed it, they will ask you, will you take 10? I'm not that prideful of a person, except when they're lowballing my lowball offer. And I fire back, nope, I said what I said. An elephant's word, 100%. This is $20. And then they're like, do you deliver? I'm like, no, I'm not delivering this for $20. Okay? Let me get out of this. Let me get back to the Bible. What you're doing on Facebook Marketplace, that is a conditional covenant. You're both trying to figure out, I'll do this if you do that. And the reason you hate Facebook Marketplace is because you're always trying to get to the other person to agree to terms that are favorable to you, and they're trying to get you to agree to terms that are favorable to them. That is a conditional covenant. The covenant that God made with Abraham, go back and read every word. It is an unconditional covenant. God did not haggle with Abraham. I don't want your nasty $10 bill, Abraham. Your level of faithfulness is nowhere close to mine. The covenant I'm going to make with you is dependent on me and me only. Put it on my shoulders. Put it on my character. Put it on my ability to fulfill what I promised. And I promise you that when my son arrives, you'll see the whole picture, that I'm faithful even when you're not. The Davidic covenant. You know some things about the life of David. You think God wanted to barter with David's faithfulness? No, he chose not to. He said, I will provide a king whose throne will never end. It's on him. There is a difference between an unconditional and a conditional covenant. And the covenants that Matthew highlights are unconditional covenants. God said it, and he followed up. Now, that's really important for a couple of reasons. The first is this, that the faithfulness of God is the point. God is highlighted. And yeah, I'll admit, I'm a Bible nerd. So when I read Father Abraham had many sons, we tend to make a hero out of Abraham, even though in Abraham's story, God is the hero. King David, I mean, man, the whole Star of David is the symbol of the nation of Israel. We tend to make a hero out of David, even though God was the hero in David's story. You see, the faithfulness of God is highlighted in his unconditional covenants that are fulfilled in the person of Jesus. But the second thing that you've got to see, and we're going to push into this, the faithfulness of God neutralizes my unfaithfulness. You guys remember some of the things Abraham did? That second son he had, when Sarah's like, listen, this ain't going to happen. Why don't you go sleep with the servant maid, and then that way you can have a son? And man, Abraham should have known the answer to that question, but he listened and he did it. And God says, that's not what I promised. I promised you and Sarah. And then when they're traveling and he goes into a kingdom and the kingdom sees Sarah and he's like, I would be interested in her. Abraham's like, yeah, that's my sister. Whoa, man, the size of the bouquet you need to buy for your wife after you call her your sister. David sleeping with Bathsheba and covering it up by killing her husband. The hero in these stories is the faithfulness of God, whose faithfulness neutralizes their unfaithfulness. And that's what I want to push into. Let's take a look at the rest of this lineage. Go back to verse 3. Judah is the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Whoa, we are in no man's land now. Yes, we've got sweet Abrahamic and Davidic covenants. Y'all, you did not come to Christmas church to hear this story, but here we go. So Judah had some sons, and his first son dies before he could give Tamar kids. Let me explain to you what that's the equivalent of. Having no Social Security and no Roth IRA. Tamar is wildly exposed, completely vulnerable, because the social system then was have a family so that in your strength you take care of them, and when you start to lose your strength, they're gaining theirs and they take care of you. Her husband is gone and she has no children. Well, the book of Leviticus takes care of this. It's Judah's responsibility to now care for her. And he kind of does. He says, all right, my son Onan will marry you. He has no wife. He'll bring you in and he'll take care of you. Onan is a scoundrel. And he does not, I know, there was such harsh language. No one's ever used that since like the 60s. I apologize. Onan is a piece of work. Onan sleeps with Tamar, but he won't give her a pregnancy. And the Bible says that Onan dies, and she still has no family. She's lost 2 sons, and there's nothing in life to take care of her. It's Judah's responsibility to take care of her. Well, I don't know why, but Judah is like done with this. He's starting to be afraid of her. I don't know, but he promises another son who's not quite old enough yet. He's like, okay, when he's old enough, he'll take you as his wife, and our family will cover you. And he never does. And so Tamar does something wild. Guys, this is very Jerry Springer-esque. Tamar realizes she's been lied to, and she is stuck. And so she dresses like a prostitute, and she waits on a road that Judah travels, and Judah hires her, and they go off, and they go off, and then Judah leaves. Well, Tamar winds up pregnant from that. I told you, this is Jerry Springer, Jerry. And then Judah has the audacity to call her unrighteous because he's like, whoa, I happen to know you don't have a husband. How is it that you're pregnant? And she pulls out his wallet, and she's like, well, I had a client. Should we take a look at who it was? And Judah goes, oh, man. Yeah, I didn't handle this the right way. No, you did not. And then Judah repents, and he takes care of her. Here's my point. You're telling the story at your Christmas dinner. You guys are dressed up, and you've got prime rib, and it is fancy. And then you decide to tell the story. Have I ever told you the story about your aunt? And you tell that story at Christmas dinner. The unconditional nature of the promises that God gave Abraham and God gave David are highlighted in the righteousness of his son Jesus. And so God is going to be very honest when he tells the lineage, because there's no such thing as lineage that is going to culminate in Jesus if it can't just talk about our unfaithfulness. And I'm begging you, Christian, please have the same level of honesty that God is able to talk to us. Have that back to him. Because the parts of you that feel like I'm not righteous enough to talk with God, I'm not righteous enough to volunteer and serve with my church, I'm not righteous enough to worship God, and there's a little bit of you that you adore him, you love Christianity, you love our church, but you have a sense of shame that you're never just open with him. I cannot shout loud enough that the Bible is wide open honest with you. And one of the things that we can learn about the who of Christmas is God is begging you to be wide open honest with him, because he already started this. That it is unconditional covenants that he promised to Abraham and to David. And Jesus is another unconditional covenant he makes with you. Be honest. Because your sweet, and it's important, but your sweet unfaithfulness is not strong enough to undo what Jesus has accomplished. And so in the courage of the honesty of the Bible to you, you be to him, and you bring that unfaithfulness to him, because his son undoes it. Now, we need to keep moving because we aren't even in the second genealogy. So let's buzz a little bit faster. We've got another couple of crazy stories. Rahab is in the lineage. She was not a prostitute by in cosplay. She was just a legit prostitute. Ruth was a Moabite. If you don't know how offensive the Moabites were to the people of God, either go to gotquestions.org, that is a Christian site, or if you're really good at giving prompts that are direct, go to your preferred AI chatbot and ask this question. Hey, how much of an enemy were the Moabites to the people of God? And let it move you through biblical history. But that's not all. Look at this crazy one. David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. He doesn't even call her Bathsheba. The courage and honesty of the Bible to say, well, you remember who Solomon's mom was, right? His mom was the wife of Uriah. And after David cheated with her, he covered it up with a murder. Whoa! The honesty and the courage of the lineage that leads to Jesus is all captured. It's all working together. The point is that, yes, God fulfills his promises to Abraham and to David in the Son. But those promises are unconditional. Look at the rest of it. You've got to be honest, and I want you to have the same level of confidence that your unfaithfulness is covered by the faithfulness of God. There is intentionality in the who of the Christmas. The who of the first Christmas matters because Jesus filled impossible promises, and he came from improbable people. All right, we really got to get cooking because I'm running out of time. Luke's genealogy is a lot longer, but we're only going to look at the beginning and the end, so don't worry, I got you. Luke's genealogy is actually not what he starts with. He starts with the promises given to Mary and then Elizabeth, and he talks about Jesus and John being born. And then in chapter 3, almost at the end of the chapter, Luke's like, ooh, let me tell you some cool things about the lineage that Jesus comes from. Luke chapter 3, verse 23 says this. Jesus, when he began his ministry, he was about 30 years of age, being the son, as was supposed, of Joseph. Now, if you're watching online, take a look at the title card next to you because we've got bolded what I can see on this wall here. This parentheses is really important, and I'm worried that you think maybe that translators put it in after the fact. We did not. It's literally the way that we would carry in English what Luke wrote down in Greek. He says, yeah. Jesus was the son of Joseph, and then he's got this little phrase in Greek that we think is best translated in a parenthetical thought, or so people assumed. Because Luke had just gotten done in 2 chapters explaining to you that in the same way God breathed life and Adam came about, God breathed life and Eve came about. Once again, God is restarting creation and he speaks life into Mary. And so because Luke has already gone out of his way to explain to us that God is recreating ordered humanity in the way that he brought about a pregnancy that mirrors what he did in the garden, he's now got to get to the genealogy. And when he does in chapter 3, he says, people thought it was Joseph, but I've already told you, you know the real deal. That all of the genetic passed down is wrapped up all in Mary's body. And so then he goes through a really long genealogy that I believe is the genealogy of Mary. And there's some cool stuff in that. If you go into all the different generations, there's other promises in there, other stories that just unfold. But we ain't got time for that. I know that. You're starting to get excited and worried at the same time. Look where Luke ends, though. He pushes all the way down, and in verse 38, he ends it with this: the son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. Why would he tie Mary to Adam? Well, because there was a really important covenant made with Eve, that Adam and Eve stepped away from their father. And it's not just in chapter 1 and 2 that he's telling the creation story again and how Mary conceived, but he pushes in the genealogy all the way back to this. Hey, Eve, because you've stepped away, because you've broken this, there's a curse on you, and childbirth is going to be painful. But let me speak something into the childbirth. Someone through your line is going to come, my son, and my son will crush the head of the serpent that deceived you. And so Luke is doing a really sweet thing to say, now the promise made to Eve in the pain of her childbirth is now alive in the womb of Mary. And the faithfulness of God in that moment that we stepped away is alive and kicking in the womb of this sweet young girl. It's beautiful. The genealogy of both Matthew and Luke are remarkable because it does this. It's tremendously honest, but it speaks, it shouts, it's so solid. It wants you to move your life into this reality that your unfaithfulness once upon a time did separate you from God. That is right and it is real. But God makes covenants with us, promises that he knows full well. If it was conditional, he's going to be haggling with you on Facebook chat over and over. Nope, I need this. Nope, I need this. Nope, I need this. So he didn't do it that way. He promised his son, who undoes. His Son's perfection is so complete, so thorough, that he is a ruler who will last forever, way more than Rome, and that he will be a blessing to all nations through his church. But really, ultimately, it's the promise made to Adam and Eve that in our separation from God, he brings us right back. In the moment that we stepped away, God called out, "Where are you?" And it is not legend, it is not myth, it is not some cooked up and reheated idea that at Christmas God legitimately wants you near him. It's more solid than any American Christmas tradition. It's more solid than any global Christmas tradition. If we put aside all of the trees and gifts and even Mariah Carey's song, the thing that could be shouted about the most at looking through the who that led up to Christmas is this: that God deeply, persistently, forever loves you, and he puts that relationship completely on his back. Philippians chapter 2 tells us that his Son chose that body so that that body could die, so that your sin would die with his body. And then in newness of life, he's raised. It's not just something that churches trump up to fill pews on Christmas Eve. It's so real. Luke's genealogy says that Jesus restores with the curse removed. And so what do we do with all of this? What do we do? That God's faithfulness can be contrasted with our unfaithfulness. Yep, he knew it's all working together. That's okay, because then watch. In Matthew's gospel, who does he focus on? Joseph's genealogy, and then Joseph does 3 really sweet things at Christmas. He wants, the first thing, he's plotting a divorce. When he learns that Mary is pregnant, he's like, oh, well, I happen to know that that's not my baby, and so apparently something's gone wrong. But he's humble, and he decides he's going to quietly divorce her so that she doesn't get blasted by others. And God speaks to Joseph and says, no, Joseph, I need you to believe something real big, man. I spoke that into her. I need you to stick with her. And Joseph just said yes. And then, as she delivers, God speaks to Joseph again, and he says, Joseph, I need you to get out of your own land. I need you to go to Egypt. Do you know what that would have sounded like to a proud, free Jewish man? To go back to the land of captivity? Joseph told him, okay. And then when it was time, and Joseph might have gotten word that, holy cow, all the babies in my village died. I'm so glad that God got us out of there. God says, I need you to go back now. Ooh, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going back to that block in Chicago. I don't know if I'm going back to wherever that is. Joseph told him yes again. In a really sweet way, Matthew's story of the genealogy of Joseph culminates with 3 stories of Joseph's obedience. And then Luke's gospel, the lineage of Mary, which character does he focus on? He focuses on Mary's heart. Like, what happens when the angel talks to Mary? You get to see what she's thinking and feeling, don't you? Because she's talking it back. You see action in Joseph. He's not much of a talker. He's a doer. Mary is a processor. Then she goes off, and with all of this, what do we get recorded? Her conversation with Elizabeth. And then after the conversation with Elizabeth, what do we get? We get a song that Mary sings, the Magnificat in church tradition. And she just sings about how amazing God is. If in Joseph we see faithful action, in Mary we see faithful insight. And I think that's the point this weekend, is if you slow down and you take a look at all of the who's that culminate in Jesus, we see in history what we see in ourselves. That God is shouting to you, his covenant with you rests on him. And yes, there's unfaithfulness in your life. That's okay, because you bring that to him and his faithfulness covers it. Be boldly honest with it. And then maybe in us something can be produced, like it was in Joseph or in Mary. Gentlemen, if you're a doer and you're like, Tim, all the heart stuff and the talking, man, I don't know, but I would love to do something for the kingdom. Let God call you to that. Let him. Use your man power to do something. Ladies, if you are constantly thinking and processing and feeling and you want that to move out of you for the glory of the kingdom, let the example of Mary be that for you as well. Last week we said this, could we do something this holiday season so that we don't cram Christmas into the stress, but that we separate it up and above? I would suggest these 3 things are still options for us. Number 1, we can do. We can be in a gospel this month. And I'm just going to start my day or I'm going to end my day. Nope, I'm going to look at Jesus. He's real, he's present, and he's bigger than everything I see. Number 2, we could see that our time in prayer doesn't always have to be, hey, God, could you? Hey, God, I love this about you. God, I'm proud of this about you. God, I'm going to stop and I'm going to be very intentional that during the month of December, my prayers adore you more. Or, thank you so much, let's bring people to this King. Let's bring people to this blessing. Let's go be like Mary and sit and talk about it. Let's go be like Joseph and be about it. And let's move ourselves to the God who is the source of all joy. And so we want to end service today with communion because I think communion is that same repeated event. And if you've got the elements, that's wonderful. If you don't, raise your hand. We've got people bringing them to you right now. But here's what this communion night was. That somebody sat at the table with Jesus named Judas, and his unfaithfulness was so strong that it actually was dismissed out of the room, and Judas left to go have Jesus betrayed. And in light of that unfaithfulness, in that exact moment, Jesus said, hey, let's take communion. And they said, what's that? And he explained, well, this loaf of bread is just like my body, and we're going to break it, and you're going to be glad that this bread was broken. I want you to be glad that my body was broken. And then as you're eating the bread, we're going to take this cup. And in the same way, you would think, oh, perfect. This cup washes away all the little bits of bread that are left. My blood washes away what you've broken. And so right there in the face of those men who just had their hearts crushed by Judas leaving, God promises redemption. That communion is an unconditional covenant between God and you. So we're going to worship, and I'll come back out, and with full hearts, we're going to take communion at Christmas time because it's the unconditional covenant between Jesus and you.
All-sufficient merit, shining like the sun, a fortune I inherit by no work I have done. My righteousness I forfeit at my Savior's cross, where all sufficient merit did what I could not. In love he condescended, eternal now in time, a life without a blemish, the Maker made to die. The law could never save us, our lawlessness had won, until the pure and spotless Lamb had finally come. It is done, it is finished, no more debt I owe, paid in full, all sufficient, merit now my own. I lay down my garments, any empty boast, good works now all corrupted by the sinful host. I'm dressed in my Lord Jesus, a crimson robe made white. No more fear of judgment, his righteousness is mine. It is The joy of my salvation shall be my final breath. And when I stand accepted before the throne of God, I'll gaze upon my Jesus and thank him for the cross. Yes, I'll thank him for the cross. It is done. It is finished. No more debt I owe. Paid in full, all sufficient. Merit now my own. It is done. It is finished. No more debt I owe. Paid in full, all sufficient. Merit now my own. Oh, your merit now my own. Oh, your merit now my own.
And so, Christian, the hope that you've got is not thin. It is not distant. It is not maybe just a shadow or shade that someone else has exaggerated, but God probably doesn't love you. It's larger than you can imagine. It's closer than you can imagine. God loves you completely. All of your unfaithfulness is covered by his. And so when we take communion, we celebrate the best unconditional covenant that anyone has ever drawn with anyone. And so peel back that layer and take this humble, small wafer as we celebrate the body that unconditionally covers your sin. Jesus, we adore the sacrifice you made. We thank you for this. And Jesus, we celebrate your body together. Let's eat. On the heels of that, he wants the cup to wash away. His heart is for you, not against you. Aware of your unfaithfulness, but more convinced by his. And so we take this cup out of gratitude, of forgiveness. Let's drink together. Jesus, thank you for being real. Thank you for being honest. Thank you for being faithful. And Jesus, I pray that our eyes every year would open once again, our lenses wide, to this unconditional covenant you've made with us. That in the presence of your body, you want our lives with you forever. Jesus, move us in this hope. In your name we pray. And everybody said, amen.